We now have a way to interact with the data that the user inputs into the options page. But the problem is, currently we don't have a way to actually remember any of the data that they set inside of their options page. We need some kind of storage system in order to remember all these options. And in addition to remembering the options, they have to be somehow accessible inside of the pop-up. Since when we set the options inside of this options page, we want to customize the way that this pop-up works. So in order to actually solve that problem, there is a special Chrome API called the Chrome Storage API. So if we head back over to the API reference, and I'll do a search for storage, you can see that the Chrome.storage API is used to store, retrieve, and track changes to user data. And there are a lot of different caveats to the Chrome Storage API, but you can assume that it works like any basic local storage API. If you've worked with the local storage API with JavaScript before, it pretty much works more or less the same way. But the only two important things is that we actually need permissions from the user in order to use the storage API. And another thing is that there are two main storage APIs. There's the chrome.storage.sync API and the chrome.storage.local API. And the only difference pretty much is that the chrome.storage.sync API will sync all of their Chrome storage data across different browser sessions, whereas local is local to a single session. In general, you probably want to use chrome.storage.sync whenever you work with user options, since you want those to be saved across different browser instances. So in order to use this inside of our options page, what we'll do is first update our manifest file by adding in the permissions field. So we can see inside of the documentation, we add the permissions field. And it actually takes an array of permissions because you can actually have multiple Chrome APIs that require permissions. So we'll pass in that storage key. And then inside of options.js, what we're going to do is set this name input.value to a constant called name. And then right after that, we're going to call chrome.storage.sync.set. And the parameters for this is, the first one is the object that you want to save into storage. And this is any basic JavaScript object, so you can pass in array values in here if you wanted to. But all we're going to do is pass in a name value with a key name. And the value is going to be what's inside of name input.value. So we would just pass in this name object. So for shorthand, you can just use name, comma. And then the second parameter that you can pass into this function is a callback that happens after the storage has been set. So for now, we'll just do console.log. It's set to, then we'll pass in name. Okay. And then if we actually refresh our extension and hit the save options button, you can actually see that it says cannot read property sync of undefined. And that's because we haven't refreshed our extension yet, and we don't have the right permissions. So if you don't have the permissions, it'll usually give you an error like this, like it doesn't understand what this Chrome API is. So once we refresh the extension and open back up our options page, you can see that if I put in my name and I hit save options, name has been set. Okay, but if we refresh the page, you'll notice that even though we've set the name, we haven't updated the value inside of our name input to be that saved value. So referring back to this, we'll now need to use the get function in order to retrieve that value. The set function is for setting values, get function is for retrieving values. So we'll do chrome.storage.sync.get, and then the first parameter for this is the keys of all of the fields that you want to retrieve. And these keys should match the keys that you used inside of the set function. So if you want to retrieve the name field, we just pass in name. And just for demonstration, I'm going to pass in a test field that we haven't set to see what it looks like in the resulting object. And the callback this time has a parameter of results. And what we'll do is we'll just console.log results. And since this isn't inside of an event listener, this chrome.storage.sync.get will happen every time we load the options page, compared to this chrome storage.sync.set, which happens every time we click on the save button. So if we refresh the page, we can see that the resulting object has a name field and it has the key Jason, which is the name that we saved earlier. But this test key doesn't show up at all. So keep that in mind and be careful when accessing keys, since sometimes when you access a key, it might not actually exist on the object. So I'll remove this, and we can see if I enter your name and then we save options and then we refresh the page, things have been updated. So now all we have to do is do name input value is equal to result.name. And when we refresh the page, we can see that this has been updated properly. Then I can change it back, and we'll see that things are now saved. So let's head over to our pop-up and actually display the stored name value inside of it. So inside of our pop-up, let's add another h2, and we'll give it ID equals to name. And then inside of our pop-up, we'll get an access to that name element. Const name elements document, so get element by ID, and our ID is name. And then similar to what we did inside of our options, we'll have to retrieve the value by doing chrome.storage.sync.get, and we'll pass in an array of keys. So we'll get our name field. Then inside of the result, what we'll do is we'll set name elements text content equal to template string. So your name is, and I'll pass in result.name. So when we reopen this extension, we can see your name is Jason. So if I change its name to something like John, then we reopen the extension, we can see it has now updated. So in order to actually test out what the extension would look like on install, if we try to refresh the extension and reopen the pop-up, you can see that it still says your name is John. So when you actually refresh the extension like this, it doesn't wipe out what was previously stored inside of your Chrome storage. The only way to actually reset the storage is to remove the extension entirely. We're going to do load unpacked again, and then we'll load in our entire timer extension folder. And then now, when we reopen our pop-up, we can see that your name is undefined. Because when you try to access a property on an empty object that doesn't exist, it returns back the value undefined. So what we should actually do to safeguard against this is create a constant called name and set it equal to res.name. And if we do the special question mark, null coalescing operator in JavaScript, what happens is if this evaluates to null, it'll set name to whatever is on the right hand side. So here I'll say something like question mark to indicate to the user that their name is unknown. So if we open back up our pop-up, we'll have to also update our template string to actually use the constant. And when we open up our pop-up, you can see your name is now question mark. So this same problem will be inside of our options page. We have this undefined. So what we'll do, question mark, and then we'll pass in triple question marks. And then if it's unset, it'll be set to these triple question marks. But if I set it back to something normal, like my own name, and then open up the pop-up, we can see that things are still working.